There is literally no good guide on this some fucking how. So, alright, I'll do it myself. Damage is a very not important stat, despite everyone and their mother telling you it is. So, let me dispel some common myths about damage that makes people on, like, Reddit think it's important. If you have a weapon with 50% damage, that does not mean your weapon is dealing half damage. The way the damage stat works is every weapon has base damage like this. The damage stat is that modifier right there, that 100 to 132 on heavy attacks and 37 to 49 on light attacks. So on the knife, the damage stat determines it's roughly about like 15 to 30% of your total damage is coming from this damage roll. Now, once you have over 60% damage, something else I want to showcase, the gap between a weapon with like this that has 60% damage. So you see how we have 202 light attack power here, but the max is 214. The gap between 61% damage and 80% damage it's genuinely 5%. This is a 5% damage difference. So as long as your damage is at least 60%, don't even worry about it. And honestly, on most weapons, let me clue you in, going past 60% damage doesn't actually lower the amounts to hit anything in the game for most weapons. So it's actually wasted. Okay, now, mobility. This is affecting your sprint speed, dodge distance, and dodge limit. As long as you have, I think it's over like 60 or like 50-ish% mobility. I don't know. I don't dump mobility because I'm not bad at the game. As long as you have like over 50% mobility and you get 4 to 5 dodges, depending on the weapon, then that's good enough, but I would not recommend it. Because moving fast is how you stay alive. If you watch any higher level Tide gameplay, even as far back as Vermintide 1 challenge runs, constantly moving and moving quick is how everyone stays alive in every situation. You cannot trust that you will be strong enough to fight your way out of every situation. That's just objectively not possible in these games. But you can trust that you will be fast enough and able to dodge enough that you can maneuver your way out. Penetration is far more important than damage because it is a modifier on your damage versus armor. So, heavy attack damage versus flak, 89%. And as you can see, again, remember, as long as you're over 60%, you're getting like 60% of this bar makes up like 80% of the total bonus that you can gain from it. So as long as you are over 60%, that's like okay, look at Finesse. Look at Finesse. You're only missing 10% damage by having 67% Finesse. But anyway, so this is going to make all of your attacks. So like for example, heavy attack versus carapace, 60%. Having 78 penetration, it means 60% of my damage is going through. It is just like 60% carapace damage. This will give you far more damage versus armor than this stat will. Finesse is affecting your weak spot power and your attack speed. And it's affecting your critical. And it's affecting your critical and weak spot. And these are all stacking. So Finesse is incredibly important. I have a video saying damage is a dump stat, and I show how weapons with high Finesse will out DPS weapons with high damage. A 0% damage weapon, most of the time, will be out DPS'd. 0% damage, 80% Finesse will out DPS, 80% damage, 0% Finesse, a lot of times because of attack speed. As you can see, the range here is between 0 and 10%. So if you have like 40% Finesse, you're only getting like 4% attack speed from that, which is a big deal. First target is exactly what it sounds like. It is a damage multiplier versus first target. And this is why things like knives and axes are so good at dealing with armor. Because this is a 14% damage increase versus armor. This is just free like 60% penetration versus armor. And also, if you look, you can hit view attack breakdown to see this critical weak spot does a lot. Like, this hits really fucking hard. Hold on. Yeah, right here. This strike down hits really, really fucking hard. And then you consider that a lot of that damage ignores the armor and is getting buffed by all these modifiers. Yeah, that's how you get knives that like two-shot crushers without Uncanny Strike. Okay, now, let's talk about these stats. So, Cleave damage. Cleave damage is not super duper important. The biggest part about cleave damage is that damage versus flak armored. Because if there's flak in a horde, if you have super low cleave, then, you know, it just kind of, it'll really hamper you. This is not a dump stat, but it doesn't have to be high either. Because again, as you can see, 68% makes up the overwhelming majority of the buff. All we can really gain here is 1% damage versus flak. Cleave targets, however, is very important. This is something you actually kind of want at like 80. This is, like it says, damage distribution. So this is a little unclear. Basically, the higher this is, the more the damage follows through to the next cleave target. This, unironically, ends up contributing more to your cleave damage than cleave damage the stat does. Very unintuitive, I know. But if you have something like cleave targets on top of a cleave blessing like Savage Sweep, then, yeah, your weapon clears hordes in a few hits. It's like as good as the power sword, almost. Shovels have a new stat. Defenses. Defenses are... This is actually just kind of a dumb stat, if I'm being honest with you. Push cost is... You are not pushing enough as long as you're using one stamina curio. You are not pushing enough to actually, you know, have any kind of real need for this. Sprint cost is... kind of important, but not really. You can just use sprint efficiency on your curios, which you should, to make up for this. I wouldn't go below 60 on... This is one of those stats I wouldn't try to go below 60 on, but you don't really need it to be high either. Shredder. This is basically just a damage bonus to the alt attack on chain weapons. And as you can see, 375 to 495 for light attack rip damage. Well, this is only 162 to 214. So this actually makes up more of the percent total damage for the alternate attack than the flat damage stat does. And again, as you can see, this weapon is basically 80 and everything. So a 370 base can't really roll lower than 60% damage, or roll lower than 60% damage. That 60% damage gives you like 90% of the possible damage buff you're going to get from this stat. So this is what like an actually god roll weapon would look like in terms of stat distribution. Because all this other stuff ends up mattering more. And mobility is just that. It keeps you alive. You know, doing 3% more damage is not going to matter. And these are not any new stats. So let's go to weapons over here. Or guns, rather. Reload speed is just that, reload speed. And again, 66% reload speed makes up from 0 to 28, gives you 24%. That's like 90% of the possible reload speed buff is granted in that first 60%. Collateral. This is an important stat. So this affects your stagger. And this is pretty much a bolter exclusive thing here. But, with enough collateral, I forget the exact number, it's like 65 or something, you are able to stun bulwarks in one hit, which is very important. Now, let me just pull this back out. Also, mobility on weapons that aren't mobile like this ends up mattering more than on weapons that are high in mobility. Because the difference between minus 30% dodge distance and minus 22% is crazy. This is what a max mobility bolter looks like. Like, this is not great. So, you can just imagine what a 0 mobility bolter would look like. It's even worse. Stability is spread and sway. So, stability is actually interesting. So, do you see how this bolter is like, I can keep it relatively well on target? Like, it's not really that bouncy. Yeah, this is your stability. And on a weapon like the bolter, stability is really important. If you want to just chain headshots, which you kind of need to, using the bolter with like 50% stability makes it unusably bad. Revolver has a new one, critical bonus. So this is another modifier. Critical damage versus basically everything. This, again, ends up mattering more than flat damage. So this is effectively just an extra critical damage. So, like, right here, this is giving me 11% critical damage versus carapace. And this is just, like, flat. It also affects your critical chance, as you can see. So this is 20% chance to crit as a base, on top of the revolver's base 5% critical chance. So this revolver, because it rolled high critical bonus, has a base 25% critical strike chance. Then it's on veteran, so it has 30%. Then you roll the 5% on it, and now you have like 40% crit chance, and you haven't even gotten anything from the tree. There's another 5% from the tree, reciprocity. That's how you get to like consistent crits all the time. Reload speed matters a lot on a weapon like this that is a really slow reload, and damage just isn't that important. Again, if you get 60%, well, okay, so if you're trying to one-shot crushers, damage is extremely important. Having 75% damage makes it so you don't need rending strikes to consistently one-shot crushers. This is a case of breakpoints where having a high damage roll actually matters. You should actually test this stuff in the Psychanium. Penetration, mobility isn't super important on a weapon like this. Let's see. Ah, yes, ammo. So ammo is a somewhat important stat here. It's between the ammo reserves is what's important. That 500 to 58, as long as you have at least like 560, you're good. Because on veteran, survivalist takes the percent of your total ammo. So having that 580 versus 500, that gives you like an entire extra bullet or two. Actually, I think it's 2 bullets specifically for the columnist back from survivalist. That's huge. Even if it's just one, just getting 1 free bullet back every single kill everyone makes is giant. And stability actually kind of matters on fast-firing weapons. This is what a high-stability columnist is like. You see how it has like that CSGO recoil thing going on, where it kicks up for a second, and then it totally evens out to be like a laser? Yeah, it's like it's genuinely like a CSGO M4 if you've ever played that. And once you get it to this point, it's super duper easy to control with high stability. People who complain about not being able to aim the columnist are using ones with like 50% stability, and it's like, that's why it sucks. Okay, so stopping power. This is a very important stat. So you see how this is 60% versus carapace from far away? This stat will make or break things like the plasma gun. Having a low stopping power makes it take like 4 shots to kill crushers, which makes it really bad. But again, this ends up contributing more damage. What do you think does more damage? 30% damage versus flak, or right here, like 10% base damage? It's going to be the percent modifier, even if it's on a lower number. But now, this is where you need high damage right here. So when you hover over damage, some weapons, as you saw, their damage stat doesn't, it's just that damage bar right there, like at the very bottom. However, some weapons like the plasma gun have additional percent modifiers on their damage. So on weapons like this, you actually do need like 80% damage. Because if I had, say, this weapon will deal significantly less damage versus unarmored and infested, which again, there's some specials that are infested, just dogs, but still. Also, charge rate is not important on weapons like the plasma gun. It's only important on Psycher stabs. Things like charge rate. So as you can see, the hipfire charge speed, we are missing out on 0.08 seconds attack speed on the M1. That's literally nothing. Thermal resistance is how much you can shoot before heating or needing to vent. And it's actually a pretty wide range, as you can see. Braced, or like the hipfire heat generation right here. Hipfire heat generation. This halves the heat generation. So if this was like 60 or like 55, we would be able to shoot like 30-40% less before needing to vent, which massively lowers this weapon's attack speed. The plasma gun doesn't really have a dump stat other than charge rate. And ammo, it's the same thing here. And on ammo is really important here. As you can see, 75 to 135, that's half your ammo. That's half your comeback on survivalist. That's a huge deal. These are all the same. These are all the same. Okay, we can move on to Psycher now. Because Psycher has a few unique, worthwhile things talking about. Most notably, quell speed. I want to challenge a notion right away that quell speed matters. So quell speed is a unique, like, noob trap stat. A lot of people will tell you it needs to be, like, 75, because for some reason, quell speed has this weird breakpoint where, if you have, like, 70% quell speed, you get 23% quell speed off of it. But if you have like 72%, you get like 40% off of it. But I think that's like a bug, because I want to show that that doesn't actually matter. You quell virtually the exact same time. It's like some kind of visual bug. It's very weird. Okay, don't think there's anything we need to talk about here. Well, warp resistance. Okay, yeah. So warp resistance is just that. Peril generation. So if we had like 55% warp resistance here, someone is DMing me quite a lot, sorry. But if we had 55% warp resistance here, we would be generating double the peril from our attacks here, which is quite a big deal, actually. I don't believe there's anything worth talking. Yeah. Okay, so this is the Void Strike Staff. And let's talk about this. Charge rate. So, charge rate's actually a big deal. 1.9 to 1.6 seconds is like 30% of your charge speed. So, having 80% charge rate plus Warp Flurry 4 almost doubles the amount of attacks you can throw out. It is a huge increase in your DPS. Blast radius is really not that important because, as you can see, the gap between, like, at 75%, we have 3.5. The gap between 3.5 and 3.6 is fucking nothing. You will not notice it. Same with the epicenter radius. Their stats have these weird breakpoints where here, you'll see. So, like, look, warp resistance. Yeah, this is also not that important. Because as you can see, 7.3% versus 6.4%, I'm generating exactly 1% more peril when I'm charging. So, like right here. That took exactly 20 peril. If I were to use an 80% warp resistance, that would take like 19% peril, which doesn't change anything. So it's not like a super important stat. Trauma has the exact same thing going on, but for trauma, blast radius is more important because the number range is much wider, and it actually matters that you hit the epicenter here, like a lot. But let me show you what I'm talking about with quell speed. So you see how it's between minus 33% and plus 42%? This is a trauma staff that is only, but look, at 71% quell speed, it's only gaining plus 26%. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Even though it has 71% of the bar filled, it's only gaining like half the potential effect. Whereas this one has it maxed out. So now let's just look at this. Can you tell me the difference between this 20% quell speed? So that's with the quell speed not being maxed out. Now, let me just max this out again here. Okay, now look. It's exactly the same. It's exactly the same. I don't know if this is a visual bug or if it's just not implemented properly or what, but quell speed does not need to be over 70% like a lot of people say it does. For some reason, the quell speed is like the exact same. Maybe it's like half a second faster at best. Having a higher blast radius is far more important. Also, the Surge Staff has the same critical bonus as the Revolver. So this is very important. This, like, needs to be maxed for a Surge Staff to be good. You need, like, critical bonus high, charge high. The flat damage doesn't really matter here. Because, look, 66% damage... the range is 500 to 660. At 66% damage, I'm getting 630. I'm only missing 30 base damage here, which is only 5% total damage. This is less damage than one fucking damage increase node, like one of those white small nodes on the skill tree gives you. It's just not a big deal. And the last thing I want to talk about is burn versus damage on for dot weapons, like the flamethrower for Zealot. So this is a Purge Staff with we'll do this first. This is a Purge Staff with 0% burn and 79% damage. So I can only put 9 Soul Blaze stacks on. See? And they tick for 62. But if I go to one that has maxed out burn and minimum damage, I am now able to put on more Soul Blaze stacks. So first and foremost, you can see that it's ticking for less damage, which is very strange because other dots in the game, damage doesn't affect them. But look, the fact that we can apply more dots exponentially increases its damage. Going from 9 dots to 14 dots takes us from like 60 damage to 120. So even though dots have this exponential scaling thing going on, where the more dots you apply, the more impactful previous dots were. So for weapons like the Flamer and the Purge Staff, burn far more important than damage. Don't go low on damage, keep it around 70%, but damage is fairly irrelevant for these. And let me just hover over it. Yeah, it says it right there, the max stacks. And this is another thing, the overtime application rate versus the burning intensity. It's also, by the way, these are like the only weapons where the damage stat affects the dot. For everything else in the game, this isn't true. Cloud radius is also very important. Like, you want to max out like burn, cloud radius, damage, and then these two are just kind of not that important. But that's virtually every single stat in the game. I'm sure Ogryn has some unique ones, but I don't fucking care about Ogryn. Yeah, I hope this helps.